My cousin had everything handed to him growing up, new cars, private school, the works. Then, at Thanksgiving dinner, he found out I had $10 million and completely lost it in front of everyone. My aunt screamed and my dad just. Some moments just etch themselves into your soul, becoming a permanent turning point. For me, that moment was Thanksgiving dinner last year, when my entitled cousin Jackson, who'd been handed everything on a silver platter his entire life, accidentally stumbled upon my $10 million secret. The meltdown that followed? Believe me, you haven't seen drama until you've seen that. I just turned 32, but my story really begins in a modest 3-bedroom house in a Boston suburb. My dad, an electrical engineer, and my mom, a second-grade teacher, raised me with a simple philosophy: money doesn't grow on trees, Anastasia. If you want something, you work for it. And I mean everything. When I wanted a new bike at 8, I spent months doing chores, collecting recycling, and saving every birthday dollar. The pride I felt when I finally bought that blue Schwinn with the white basket? Indescribable. My parents matched my savings, but only after I'd earned my half first. Meanwhile, just across town, my Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie lived in a sprawling mansion with a pool, a tennis court, and a 3-car garage housing vehicles that cost more than my parents' annual salaries combined. Uncle Josh had inherited and expanded a massive manufacturing business, making them the wealthy branch of our family. Their son, Jackson, 2 years older than me, was the golden child who never had to wait for anything. While I saved for months for a $20 toy, Jackson would casually mention something he liked, and it would be waiting for him the next day. The contrast between our lives was stark, especially during family gatherings. I still vividly remember his 10th birthday party. They rented out an entire indoor water park. He tore through packages of expensive toys with barely a pause. The grand finale was a brand new gaming console, just released, with 15 games. He managed a half-hearted thanks before moving on. 3 months earlier, for my 8th birthday, I'd gotten a new backpack, some books, and a simple digital watch that I treasured because my parents had remembered I'd mentioned wanting it 6 months prior. My mom tried to explain it. Your cousins have different values, sweetheart. We believe in teaching you the value of things, not just giving them to you. But as a kid, it was still hard to understand why Jackson had so much more. We actually got along okay when we were very young, building forts, swimming in his pool. But as we grew older, that wealth gap became a chasm. By our preteen years, Jackson had developed an air of superiority that made me increasingly uncomfortable. He'd make comments about my clothes, asking why I wore the same jacket 2 Christmases in a row, or why my sneakers had scuff marks. He'd flash his latest gadgets, knowing I couldn't afford similar ones. Dad says people who work for other people will never be truly successful, he told me once when I was 11. He says employees are just helping someone else get rich. I didn't know how to respond. My parents both worked for others, and they seemed perfectly happy. But his words planted a small, persistent seed of doubt. There were moments the inequality stung more than others. In 8th grade, my old laptop died while I was working on a school project. My parents said we'd have to wait until my dad's next bonus. That same weekend, I overheard Aunt Melanie casually mention they'd bought Jackson his 2nd computer that year because he wanted one with better graphics for gaming. There was certainly envy, confusion, but mostly, a quiet determination began to grow inside me. A desire to prove that hard work and perseverance could be just as valuable as having things handed to you. High school solidified the divide. I went to the local public school, Jackson to Westfield Academy, an exclusive private school with tuition higher than some colleges. His uniform cost more than my entire wardrobe. At 16, I got my first job at a coffee shop, saving every penny for college. Jackson? He got a brand new BMW convertible. I still remember him revving the engine in our driveway. Sweet ride, right? He boasted, tossing the keys. Dad let me pick the color and everything. 0 miles. I nodded politely, internally calculating that his car cost about 5 years of my coffee shop salary. He couldn't understand why I didn't just ask my parents for a car. A sweet 16 without a car is kind of sad, don't you think? He asked, genuinely confused. The concept of not being able to afford something or choosing to save was utterly foreign to him. Junior year, my $1,500 Honda Civic broke down. The repair was $800, money I didn't have readily available, as everything went to my college fund. In desperation, I swallowed my pride and called Jackson, asking if I could borrow some money. He was sorry, that's a lot of cash, and suggested I ask my parents or get a credit card. That evening, his Instagram showed him at an expensive restaurant, caption, impromptu dinner. Why not? The bill could have covered my repairs twice over. I picked up extra shifts and borrowed $200 from my best friend. That taught me two things: never count on Jackson for financial help, and always have an emergency fund. Our high school graduations were worlds apart. Mine was a simple affair in the football stadium, followed by a backyard barbecue. My parents gave me a laptop for college and a $500 check. Jackson's ceremony was at an ornate performing arts center, followed by a lavish party at their country club with a live band and catering that must have cost thousands. His graduation gift? A brand new Range Rover with a massive red bow. He seemed pleased, but not particularly surprised or grateful. "You heading to state in the fall, right?" he asked me later, referring to the public university I'd earned a partial scholarship to. "Cool, cool," he nodded absently. "I'm going to Princeton. Legacy admission." Dad made some calls. I just smiled politely. Our paths were diverging. College was brutal but rewarding. My scholarship covered 60% of tuition. I worked as a research assistant and waited tables on weekends, often sleeping just 5 or 6 hours. I was one of the few women in software engineering, battling skepticism from professors and male classmates. There were nights I cried from exhaustion. Jackson's Princeton experience, meanwhile, was documented on social media: elaborate frat parties, NYC trips, tropical spring breaks. He changed his major every few months: economics, political science, art history, without a care. "Mom and Dad don't care what I study as long as I get the Princeton degree," he explained. "The connections are what matter anyway, not the classes." My junior year, I had a breakthrough. Professor Amanda Martinez, a rare female faculty member, noticed my unique thinking. She introduced me to some former students who'd started a small tech company, Visu, creating visualization software. It was a paid internship, a luxury I desperately needed. From day one, I threw myself into the work, often staying until midnight. The founding team noticed. By summer's end, the CEO, Michael, called me in. He offered me a part-time position for the school year and something else: a small equity stake in the company. "You think like an owner, not an employee," he said. "We want to make that official. This could be worth nothing, or it could be worth something someday." I signed, but told no one in my family about the equity. It felt too abstract. During holiday breaks, I'd see Jackson, now sporting designer clothes and talking incessantly about his important connections. He'd settled on economics, but complained about the workload, admitting he paid others to do his assignments. "College is just a formality," he insisted. "Dad already has a position waiting for me at the company. Executive track from day one." While he was coasting on his father's reputation, I was building something from scratch, developing skills and relationships based on my own merit. 3 years after graduation, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, our CEO: "All hands emergency meeting. 10 minutes. Main conference room." My stomach dropped. Emergency meetings usually meant two things: we were shutting down, or something monumental had happened. Given our recent funding struggles, I feared the worst. The room was tense, filled with whispering employees. Michael walked in, his voice wavering slightly. "I'll cut straight to the point. 30 minutes ago, we signed the final papers. Data Corp has acquired Visu for $200 million. The room erupted. Hugs, tears, high fives. My mind went blank. Later that afternoon, after hours of champagne and briefings, an email landed: my equity calculation. As an early employee with accumulated options, my stake amounted to slightly over 5% of the company. The acquisition translated to $10.2 million for me before taxes. I stared at the number, unable to comprehend that this money would soon be mine. Just 5 years earlier, I'd been working double shifts for textbooks. Now, at 27, I was a millionaire many times over. I paid off my student loans, bought a comfortable condo, and set aside funds for my parents' retirement. Beyond that, I made few immediate changes. The biggest decision? I told no one about my windfall, except my parents. We agreed to keep the exact amount private. Money changes how people see you, my father advised. Sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect. I continued working, accepting a leadership role with a comfortable, but not ostentatious, salary. Around this time, Jackson had graduated Princeton with mediocre grades, but an impressive social network. Despite every advantage, he struggled to find meaningful employment. After quitting several entry-level jobs, declaring them beneath his potential, he finally landed at his father's company in an ambiguous, strategic development associate role. No real responsibility, but a generous salary, company car, and expense account. Uncle Josh hoped he'd grow into it, but evidence remained elusive. Aunt Melanie once lamented to me, "We've given him every advantage." I don't understand why he's struggling to find his path. There was a pointed quality to her comment, a comparison to me unsaid. I bit my tongue. As the years passed, my investments grew, and my career advanced through genuine accomplishment. The financial security allowed me to make decisions based on what truly mattered to me, not economic necessity. I could take professional risks, volunteer, help friends. Jackson's Instagram, meanwhile, told the story of someone desperately maintaining the appearance of success, with motivational captions about hustling and entrepreneurial mindset designed to convince himself and others. He was building something meaningful. The collision of our paths was inevitable. It just happened to be at Thanksgiving dinner. The invitation came via text from Uncle Josh, but I knew Aunt Melanie dictated it. My stomach nodded. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd gone to their house for Thanksgiving. I'd made excuses, choosing to spend the holiday with my parents or friends who felt more like family. The thought of listening to Jackson boast about his imaginary accomplishments while Aunt Melanie made subtle jabs about my modest lifestyle was exhausting. But something stopped me. Maybe it was time. I had nothing to prove, and maybe my perspective had shifted enough that their performative wealth wouldn't bother me anymore. "I'll be there." "Thanks for the invitation," I replied. My mom was apprehensive. "Are you sure you want to go, sweetheart?" The last time was uncomfortable. She meant 2 Christmases prior, when Jackson had spent the entire evening describing his executive role, making pointed remarks about people who lacked ambition, glancing pointedly at me. "I'm in a different place now," I assured her. "Their opinions don't affect me the way they used to." What I didn't mention was the tiny, petty part of me that wanted to observe Jackson's inflated sense of importance, now that I secretly had more financial security than he likely ever would. Thanksgiving morning, I dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, projecting quiet confidence. The contradiction of caring about my appearance for people whose approval I claimed not to need wasn't lost on me, but I rationalized it as armor. The 45-minute drive to their mansion filled me with tension. Their house, imposing and perfectly maintained, stood festooned with holiday decorations. The circular driveway was crammed with luxury vehicles, including Jackson's gleaming black Tesla. Deep breath. I grabbed the limited edition bourbon I'd bought for Uncle Josh, a small reflection of my evolving relationship with money, and a bouquet of flowers, then walked to the door. Aunt Melanie, impeccably dressed, swung the door open. "Anastasia, darling, you made it," she chirped, air-kissing both my cheeks. "It's been far too long." I followed her through the marble foyer into the expansive great room. My parents spotted me immediately, my dad raising his glass, my mom embracing me. And there was Jackson, holding court by the fireplace, gesturing expansively to younger cousins. He'd put on weight, his expensive suit straining, his face fuller, his hair already thinning at 34. When he caught sight of me, there was a momentary flash of something, insecurity maybe, quickly masked by his usual bravado. Well, the prodigal cousin returns," he called out, loud enough for everyone. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding us, Anastasia." I smiled, determined not to let him set the tone. "Hello, Jackson." It's good to see you too. Happy Thanksgiving. I had no idea that this forced pleasantry would be among the last civil words exchanged between us that evening. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space so infrequently used it felt like a stage set. Immaculate table, heirloom china, sterling silver, crystal glasses. Place cards directed each guest. I was seated between my mother and Uncle Josh's sister, Margaret, with Jackson directly across from me, a positioning that felt deliberately orchestrated for comparison. My parents exchanged a knowing glance, my father giving me a subtle wink. The initial conversation flowed pleasantly enough, covering safe topics. I started to think I'd overestimated the potential for discomfort. That illusion shattered when Uncle Josh raised his glass. Before we officially begin, he boomed, "I'd like to recognize some exciting developments." As many of you know, Jackson has recently been promoted to Director of Strategic Initiatives at J&M Manufacturing. A murmur of congratulations circled the table. I kept my polite smile. I knew from industry contacts that Director of Strategic Initiatives was exactly the vague title created for people with connections, not qualifications. Furthermore, Uncle Josh continued. He's spearheading our expansion into the Asian market with a new product line he conceptualized himself. Jackson beamed, nodding graciously at the admiring comments from relatives too clueless to question these claims. My father caught my eye, his expression neutral, but his thoughts were transparent to me. We both knew J&M had been struggling to enter the Asian market for years, and any new initiative was almost certainly the actual executive team's work. Anastasia, Aunt Melanie turned to me with exaggerated interest. "How are things at your little tech company? Still enjoying the 9 to 5 world?" Before I could respond, Jackson interjected, "Don't be modest, Aunt Melanie. I'm sure Anastasia's role is very important." "What was the title again, cousin?" "Senior developer? Project coordinator." "I'm the integration team lead," I replied evenly. After our acquisition, I've been managing how our technology is implemented within the parent company's existing systems. Acquisition. Uncle Josh perked up, business interest momentarily overriding family politics. I hadn't heard about that. "Who bought your startup?" "Datacorp acquired us last year," I said, deliberately downplaying the significance. "It's been a positive transition overall." Jackson's expression flickered briefly, recognition of Datacorp's industry standing registering, before he regained composure. "Well, that must be nice, having a stable corporate parent. Much less stressful than real entrepreneurship, I imagine." I chose not to point out he had never entrepreneured anything in his life, taking a bite of turkey and complimenting Aunt Melanie on the meal instead. Throughout dinner, Jackson repeatedly steered the conversation back to his supposed business acumen, describing meetings with key Asian investors and revolutionary product developments in terms vague enough to be meaningless. My parents maintained polite interest. I occasionally caught my father suppressing sighs of exasperation. The pivotal moment occurred during dessert. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I intended to ignore it until I saw it was from David, my financial advisor friend, with the subject line "Urgent Investment Opportunity Closing Tonight." Knowing my Thanksgiving plans, I suspected it was genuinely time-sensitive. "Excuse me," I said, rising from the table. "I need to take care of a quick work matter. Everything looks delicious. I'll be right back." I stepped into the adjacent study for privacy, quickly scanning David's email about a limited investment opportunity in a promising green technology startup. The terms looked favorable, aligning with my interest in sustainable investments. I replied, confirming my interest in allocating $2 million from my diversified portfolio, adding a postscript asking how his own Thanksgiving was progressing. As I pressed send, I became aware of someone entering the room behind me. Turning, I found Jackson standing uncomfortably close, 2 snifters of expensive brandy in his hands. "Thought you might want something to sip while you handle your critical emergency," he said, his tone making it clear he doubted the importance of my interruption. "Can't let the corporate overlords enjoy their holiday without checking in, right?" "Thanks," I said, accepting the brandy while slipping my phone into my pocket. "It wasn't work, actually, just a time-sensitive investment matter." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Investment? Like a 401k adjustment or something?" The condescension in his voice triggered a rare moment of competitiveness in me. No, I replied, a little too calmly. A private equity opportunity in the sustainable tech sector. Private equity? He laughed as though I'd told an amusing joke. Those typically require minimum buy-ins of at least 100,000. What are you doing, pooling resources with friends? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again with David's reply. Jackson's eyes flicked down to where the notification illuminated my pocket. The preview text was clearly visible, confirmed for $2 million. We'll execute tonight. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, fellow millionaire. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Jackson processed what he had just seen. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then something darker, a mixture of jealousy and anger I had never witnessed before. $2 million, he finally sputtered, his voice rising. What kind of game are you playing, Anastasia? I'm not playing any game, I replied, suddenly aware we were creating a scene that could be heard from the dining room. It's a private matter, Jackson. Let's rejoin the others. But Jackson was not about to let this go. He blocked my path to the door, his face flushing red beneath his designer stubble. No. You don't get to drop something like that and walk away. Are you trying to tell me you have $2 million to invest in some random startup? That's more than most people's entire net worth. Jackson, please lower your voice, I urged, hearing the conversation in the dining room falter. This isn't the time or place. Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place, he countered, following me as I attempted to move around him. All these years looking down on my family, judging our lifestyle, acting so superior with your work ethic and modest living, and meanwhile, you're what, secretly rich? Is this some kind of trust fund you've been hiding? We re-entered the dining room to find all eyes fixed on us, dessert forks suspended in midair. Is everything all right? Aunt Melanie asked, her practiced hostess smile strained. Ask Anastasia, Jackson replied before I could speak. Apparently, my cousin, the humble employee, is throwing around millions of dollars in investments. When were you planning to share that little detail with the family? A stunned silence descended. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. Jackson, that's enough, my father said firmly. Anastasia's financial situation is her private business. Private business? Jackson's voice rose further, brandy sloshing over the rim of his forgotten snifter. That's rich coming from you, Uncle David. All these years acting like we are the materialistic ones for providing our son with advantages. Meanwhile, your daughter is sitting on some secret fortune. What kind of hypocritical game is this family playing? It's not a game, I said, finding my voice despite the chaos unfolding. The startup I worked for was acquired last year. My equity stake translated to approximately $10 million. I chose not to broadcast that information because it doesn't define who I am. The number landed like a physical blow. Jackson actually staggered slightly, his face contorting in disbelief and outrage. Aunt Melanie gasped audibly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. $10 million? Jackson repeated, each word dripping with accusation. You're worth $10 million, and you've been pretending to be just a regular employee this whole time? Driving that modest car, living in that ordinary condo, acting like butter wouldn't melt in your mouth. I haven't been pretending anything, I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. I continued working because I find the work meaningful. I live within comfortable means because excessive luxury doesn't interest me. Not everyone measures their worth by their possessions, Jackson. That was the breaking point. With a roar of frustration that seemed to emanate from somewhere primal, Jackson swept his arm across the table, sending crystal glasses, fine china, and the remainder of Aunt Melanie's pumpkin pie crashing to the floor. How dare you, he shouted, years of insecurity erupting at once. How dare you judge me and my family when you've been secretly wealthy this whole time? At least we're honest about who we are. Aunt Melanie burst into tears, not over her shattered dishware, but seemingly from the revelation itself. It's not fair, she wailed, turning accusingly toward my father. You always made us feel terrible for giving Jackson advantages, for wanting him to have the best things. And all this time, your daughter was accumulating a fortune in secret. My father, normally the most even-keeled person I knew, stood slowly from his chair, his voice deadly calm. Melanie, what's not fair is your fundamental misunderstanding of what we taught our daughter. Anastasia earned every penny of that money through hard work, intelligence, and character, qualities we prioritized over material possessions. The fact that you and Jackson immediately assumed there must have been some deception involved speaks volumes about your values, not ours. The room fell silent except for Aunt Melanie's continued sobbing and the sound of Jackson's ragged breathing as he glared at me with undisguised hostility. I have worked for everything I have, I said quietly, addressing not just Jackson, but the entire stunned family. Every opportunity, every achievement, every dollar. No one handed me anything. For years, I've listened to you belittle my choices, imply that I lacked ambition or success because I didn't flaunt wealth or status. I never corrected those assumptions because I don't measure my worth by your standards, and I'm not going to start now. I picked up my purse and coat, suddenly exhausted. Thank you for dinner. I think it's best if I leave now. As I walked toward the door, I paused to place the bourbon bottle I had brought on the side table, still neatly wrapped. It seemed like a symbol of something now, a peace offering rendered meaningless by the chasm of understanding that had finally, irrevocably revealed itself. Behind me, I could hear Jackson continuing to rant, his voice cracking. She thinks she's so much better than everyone. Little Miss Perfect with her secret millions while the rest of us are just shallow materialists in her eyes. The last thing I heard as I closed the front door was Aunt Melanie's shrill accusation directed at my parents. This is your fault. You raised her to judge us. The cold November air hit my face like a welcome slap, clearing the emotional fog of the dining room. My hands shook slightly as I fumbled with my keys. What had just happened felt momentous, a collision of worldviews decades in the making, finally erupting. The drive home passed in a blur. By the time I pulled into my condo's parking garage, a hollow emptiness had settled in my chest. I wasn't upset about the revelation of my finances. That was bound to come out eventually. And perhaps there was even a certain relief. What devastated me was the realization that my family, the people who had known me my entire life, could so quickly reduce me to nothing more than a dollar figure, could assume deception rather than achievement, could twist something I had earned into making me the villain of our family narrative. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my parents, checking on me, expressing their dismay. I sent brief reassurances, but couldn't muster the energy for a real conversation. Then, my phone rang with an unexpected caller, Uncle Josh. My finger hesitated. Anastasia, his voice sounded strained, older. I wanted to call and, well, I'm not exactly sure what to say, except that I'm sorry for how tonight unfolded. The apology surprised me. Uncle Josh was usually concerned with appearances. It was an unfortunate situation all around, I replied, unwilling to accept blame, but not wanting to escalate. Melanie is upset. She's always been sensitive about comparisons, about parenting approaches. Finding out about your success triggered something in her. And Jackson? I couldn't help asking. A heavy sigh. Jackson is Jackson. He's never handled perceived slights well, but that's partly our fault, isn't it? We never taught him to process disappointment or measure himself by his own standards. That admission was so unexpected. I had never heard my uncle acknowledge any shortcoming in how they'd raised their son. I appreciate the call, I finally said. I think everyone needs some space right now. Perhaps, he agreed, though neither of us sounded convinced. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Anastasia. Truly. The next morning, I went to my parents' house. My mom made strong coffee while my father paced the kitchen, still agitated. The nerve, he muttered, as if teaching you the value of hard work and character was some sort of crime against Jackson. My mother gently interjected, we've established that Melanie's perspective is distorted. Repeating it doesn't help anyone, least of all Anastasia. I sipped my coffee, finding comfort in their unwavering support. What happens now? I asked. Are we just supposed to pretend nothing happened? My mother considered the question seriously. I think time will determine that. Families have weathered worse storms. But regardless of what they choose to do, you have nothing to apologize for. Your success is earned, and your choices about how to handle that success reflect values we're proud to have instilled. She squeezed my hand. The real question is what you want moving forward. Do you want a relationship with that part of the family? On what terms? It was a question I couldn't immediately answer, but one that would guide my reflections for months. 3 months after the Thanksgiving disaster, I received a surprising text from Aunt Melanie. Jackson started new job today, not at family business. Entry level at marketing firm downtown. His choice. Thought you might like to know. The message, devoid of her usual emotional manipulation, felt like an olive branch. I responded with simple encouragement. Through the family grapevine, I learned more. After the Thanksgiving revelation, Jackson had apparently gone through an identity crisis, culminating in a decision to try building a career without his father's connections or financial support. It was the first job he'd ever gotten entirely on his own merits. And despite it being a significant step down from his fabricated executive role, word was he was actually applying himself with unexpected diligence. Meanwhile, I had been doing some soul-searching of my own. The financial security that had once seemed like a private victory now felt like it carried responsibility. I established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying technology, specifically those working to pay for their education. The initial endowment was $2 million, enough to support 10 students annually. I named it after my parents, honoring the values they had instilled in me. When the local paper ran a small piece about it, I sent the clipping to my extended family without comment. It wasn't about proving anything to them, but demonstrating through actions what wealth meant to me, an opportunity to create opportunity for others. A full year passed before I saw Jackson again, at a cousin's wedding. He approached me during the reception, noticeably thinner, his designer suit replaced by something more modest, but better fitting. "Hey," he said awkwardly, extending his hand. "It's been a while." I shook it, searching his face for hostility. Instead, I found humility. "I hear you've been making changes," I offered. He nodded, glancing down at his seltzer water. "Turns out starting over is harder than starting from scratch." "Who knew?" "Everyone who's ever had to do it," I replied, without malice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Listen, I'm not good at this, but I owe you an apology. What I said at Thanksgiving, how I behaved, it wasn't about you. It was never really about you." "I know," I said simply. "The scholarship thing," he continued. That was really something. Mom showed me the article. It made me think about what I would do if I suddenly had that kind of money. And I realized I had no idea beyond buying stuff I didn't need. That was a wake-up call. We talked for nearly an hour, not about money or success, but about the challenges of figuring out who you are when all the external markers you've relied on are stripped away. For perhaps the first time in our lives, we spoke as equals, each acknowledging our own struggles and growth without comparison or judgment. As the years have passed, my relationship with wealth has evolved. Money itself is neutral. What matters is the relationship we choose to have with it, the values that guide our decisions. The jealousy I once felt watching Jackson get handed everything now seems like wasted energy. In truth, I was given something far more valuable than material advantages. I was given the chance to discover my own strength, to build confidence through achievement rather than acquisition, to find satisfaction in effort rather than entitlement. And Jackson? He's still figuring things out, still untangling the complicated legacy of privilege without purpose. We're not close, but there's a mutual respect that was impossible before. Sometimes the greatest gifts require the most painful unwrapping. The $10 million changed my life, but not in the ways most people might expect. The true freedom it provided wasn't freedom from work or worry, but freedom from external validation, from the need to prove my worth through possessions or titles, or the approval of others who measure success by different standards. True wealth, I've discovered, isn't about what you have, but what you value. It's about building a life aligned with your deepest principles rather than others' expectations. It's about recognizing that being handed everything often means developing nothing within yourself, while earning your way means becoming someone who can never be diminished by circumstance or others' opinions. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your family or watched others get handed opportunities you had to fight for, remember that the struggles that seem unfair are often the very experiences developing your most valuable qualities. The things we work hardest for become the foundations we can never lose.